Good evening. My name is Viccy Kemp, and I'm the Technical Services Manager for the Flower Mound Public Library. Jared Mills has asked me to record a lecture on mysteries for his genre fiction class, and I have to say I was really looking forward to this because mysteries are my favorite genre to read. I love them all: cozies, noir, paranormal, private investigators, police procedurals, series, non-series. Mysteries is the genre where the bad guys always get their comeuppance, which is so lacking in reality, so I really enjoy reading them. Some scholars will argue that the Bible includes mysteries. For example, the story of Susanna and the elders contained in the Apocrypha of the Protestant Bible. Or perhaps the story of the witnesses who break down when Daniel questions them. But many do agree that the short story, The Three Apples, as told by Scheherazade in 1001 Arabian Nights, is the first story. A chest is discovered along the banks of the Tigris River. When the chest is opened at the caliph's court, the body of a woman cut into pieces is discovered. The caliph tasks his vizier with solving the crime within 3 days or risk losing his head. While the story is considered an archetype, the main difference is most modern detectives want to solve the mystery, while Jafar, the vizier, only wants to save his head. One of the earliest examples of detective fiction is Voltaire's Zadig, written in 1748, which features a main character that performs feats of analysis. Things as They Are, or The Adventures of Caleb Williams, written by William Godwin, shows the law as protecting the murderer and destroying the innocent. The Danish crime story The Rector of Vilby by Steen Steensen Bleecker was written in 1829, and the Norwegian crime novel The Murder of Engine Maker Rolfsson by Moritz Hansen was published in 1839. Das Fräulein von Scudder is an 1819 short story written by E.T.A. Hoffmann, in which Madame de Scudéry establishes the innocence of the police's favorite suspect in the murder of a jeweler. This is sometimes cited as the first detective story, and it was a direct influence on Edgar Allan Poe's The Murders in the Rue Morgue. It was also suggested as a possible influence on Poe is The Secret Cell, a short story published in September 1837 by William Evans Burton, describing how a London policeman solves the mystery of a kidnapped girl. Burton's fictional detective relies on practical methods, dogged legwork, knowledge of the underworld, and undercover surveillance, rather than brilliance of imagination or intellect. But it has been suggested that this story was known to Poe because he did work for Burton in 1839. True detective fiction in the English-speaking world is considered to have begun in 1841 with the publication of Poe's The Murders in the Rue Morgue, itself featuring the first fictional detective, the eccentric and brilliant C. Auguste Dupin. Poe devised a plot formula that has been successful ever since, give or take a few shifting variables. Poe followed with further Dupin's tales, The Murder of Marie Roget in 1843 and The Purloined Letter in 1845. In stories such as these, the primary concern of the plot is ascertaining truth, and the usual means of obtaining the truth is a complex and mysterious process combining intuitive logic, astute observation, and perspicacious inference. Early detective stories tended to follow an investigating protagonist from the first scene to the last, making the unrevealing a practical rather than an emotional matter. In Bleak House, Charles Dickens has the conniving lawyer Tulkinghorn killed in his office late one night, and the crime is investigated by Inspector Bucket of the Metropolitan Police Force. Numerous characters appeared on the staircase leading to Tulkington's office that night, some of them in disguise, and Peter! Jesus fucking Christ. Huh? Well, his screen just went dead. And I didn't know what to do, so I stopped talking. And so. Well, I had to click on the screen. In Bleak House, Charles Dickens has the conniving lawyer Tulkinghorn killed in his office late one night, and the crime is investigated by Inspector Bucket of the Metropolitan Police Force. Numerous characters appeared on the staircase leading to Tulkinghorn's office that night, some of them in disguise, and Inspector Bucket must penetrate these mysteries to identify the murderer. Dickens also left a novel unfinished at his death, The Mystery of Edwin Drood. Dickens' protege, Wilkie Collins, is sometimes referred to as the grandfather of English detective fiction, writing the first full-length novel, The Woman in White, in 1859, followed by The Moonstone in 1868. In 1887, Arthur Conan Doyle presented Sherlock Holmes, a character supposedly based on Dr. Joseph Bell, a physician Doyle worked with at the Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. Bell was noted for drawing large conclusions from the smallest of observations. Doyle wrote 4 novels and 56 short stories featuring the astute detective who solved crimes using deductive reasoning and forensic skills. The golden age of detectives during the 1920s and 30s show many authors emerging as popular, mainly English, with a subset of New Zealand and American writers. Agatha Christie, Ngaio Marsh, Dorothy L. Sayers, and Marjorie Allingham are examples. Various conventions of the detective genre were standardized during the Golden Age, and in 1929 some of them were even codified by the writer Ronald Knox in his Decalogue of Rules for Detective Fiction, among them to avoid supernatural elements, all of which were meant to guarantee that, in Knox's words, a detective story must have as its main interest the unraveling of a mystery whose elements are clearly represented to the reader at an early stage of the proceedings, and whose nature is such to arouse curiosity, a curiosity which is gratified in the end. In Golden Age detective stories, an outsider, sometimes a salaried investigator or a police officer, but often a gifted amateur, investigates a murder committed in a closed environment by one of a limited number of suspects. The whodunit is a mystery which focuses on great ingenuity exercised in narrating the events of a crime, usually a homicide, and of the subsequent investigation in such a manner as to conceal the identity of the criminal from the reader until the end of the book, when the method and culprit are revealed. The puzzle approach was carried further by John Dixon Carr, who begat such writers as Ellery Queen and Rex Stout. In the late 1920s, Al Capone and other mobsters piqued the interest of writers, and the private detective novel was born. Violent stories that focused on the mayhem and injustice surrounding the criminals not the circumstances of the crime. From within this literary environment emerged many stories and novels about private detectives, also known as private investigators, PIs, and private eyes, I being the vocalization of the I of investigator. Very often, no actual murder even existed. The book simply revolved around justice being served to those who deserved harsh treatment, which was described in explicit detail. In the 1930s, the emergence of the hard-boiled detective marks a turn for authors, encompassing stories with similar attitudes concentrating not on detectives, but gangsters, crooks, and other committers or victims of crime, told in stark and sometimes elegant language through the unemotional eyes of a new hero detective. These stories were an American phenomenon. Dashiell Hammett and his Continental Op begat Raymond Chandler and his Detective Philip Marlowe, followed by Ross MacDonald and Lou Archer. The modern age of hard-boiled detectives dates to 1957 and the emergence of Dan Fortune. The PI novel was a male-dominated field until 1977, when Marcia Muller published Edwin of the Iron Shoes, featuring Sharon McCone, quickly followed in 1982 by Sarah Paretsky, with V.I. Warshawski and Sue Grafton with Kinsey Milhone. Each character was brainy and could hold her own, and publishers began seeking other female writers. Subgenres of the mystery scene now include police procedurals, cozy mysteries, PI novels, historical mysteries, serial killer mysteries, amateur detective novels, and so on and so on. Detective novels also emerged as a method to introduce various subcultures to a more mainstream audience. Tony Hillerman wrote his first Navajo mystery in 1970, introducing Jim Chee and Joe Leaphorn, both tribal policemen on a Navajo reservation in the American Southwest. I think most of us are familiar with his work, so I wanted to talk this evening about other writers who featured the American Southwest in their writings. J.A. Jantz writes two series set in Arizona, one featuring Joanna Brady and the other Allie Reynolds. She also writes a series set in Seattle, Washington, starring a police detective, J.P. Beaumont. I prefer the Beaumont books, but Joanna has appeared in several of these stories, so I am familiar with her character. She is a deputy sheriff's widow who is elected sheriff in Cochise County, Arizona. The most recent Beaumont book, Second Watch, is an emotional tribute to veterans of the Vietnam War and is a reminder of the staggering cost of war and the debts we owe to those who served. Joanna is involved in tracking down the fiancé of JP's second lieutenant who was killed in Vietnam. Michael McGarrity writes a series of books revolving around Kevin Kearney. When the reader first meets Kevin in the book Tularosa, he is still recovering from the ambush that killed his partner and left his knee shattered. He has left the police force and is asked by his former partner to look for his son, who has disappeared near the White Sands Missile Range. The action takes Kevin deep into southern New Mexico, and the reader is drawn into the history, beauty, and grandeur that is New Mexico. This is one of the hallmarks of McGarrity's writing. The New Mexico scenery is practically a character in his books. Over the next several books, we watch as Kevin tries to find his way. After a stint as a deputy state police chief, Kevin ends up back in Santa Fe as the police chief. Over the course of the series, Kevin grows and changes, meets a woman he falls in love with, and gets married. Sarah Bannon is an Army career officer. This series is always entertaining. The most recent book, Hard Country, is actually a prequel featuring an ancestor of Kevin's, telling the story of how their ranch was founded in New Mexico. Some entertaining history of New Mexico from 1875 to 1918. Two stories that I have really enjoyed, or rather two series that I have really enjoyed but are difficult to find, are written by Jean Hager, an author from Tulsa, Oklahoma. While preparing this talk, I was looking to see if I could find out why she is no longer writing, but the internet let me down. Molly Bearpaw is an investigator for the Native American Advocacy League. She becomes a tribal policeman, and her series of books features information about many Cherokee rituals that are fascinating. Another series features Mitchell Bushyhead, a chief of police in a small Oklahoma town of Buckskin. Hager also writes a series revolving around a bed and breakfast, but I have not read any of those. These are fairly cozy books, but contain a lot of information about Cherokees that is interesting. Texas, of course, is a very fertile ground for writers of mystery fiction. I am sure many of you are familiar with authors such as Susan Wittig Albert or Bill Kreider. My favorite Texas writer is Joe R. Lansdale, who writes in a variety of genres, including horror. He wrote a very funny short story called Bubba Hotep, which was made into a movie in 2002, starring Ossie Davis and Bruce Campbell. Joe has a new movie that debuted over the summer called Cold in January, starring Michael C. Hall from Dexter. Joe is probably most famous for his Hap and Leonard crime series. Often dark, sometimes tongue-in-cheek, these novels see the white working class Hap and gay black Leonard fighting racism, abuse, and violence. They are a tough, wisecracking duo from East Texas. Investigators with a difference. The books are original, fresh, and convey a slightly noirish quality. The series begins with Savage Season from 1990 and includes Mucho Mojo, 1984, Two Bear Mambo, 1995, Bad Chili, 1997, Rumble Tumble, 1998, Captain's Outrageous, 2001, Devil Red, 2011, Vanilla Ride, 2009, and Dead Aim, 2012. Hap has definitely mellowed over the course of the series. I really enjoyed his recent ruminations on the art of growing up. If you're not a fan of Bang Bang Shoot 'em Up books, I highly recommend 3 other books written by Joe. The Bottoms, written in 2002, Edge of Dark Water from 2012, and his most recent book, The Thicket. Deep in the piney woods of southeast Texas, stands the Big Thicket. It is a place of wonder and mystery, one of the most biodiverse places in the world. A few years after the turn of the 19th century, smallpox moves through the small town of Hingegate in East Texas, killing Jack and Lula Fletcher's parents. Their grandfather, a former Methodist missionary, decides to take them to Kansas to live with their aunt. Grandpa is killed at a ferry crossing on the Sabine River after riling up the wrong men. The ferry flounders and Jack is cast up on the shore, watching his sister being carried off by the brigands who have just robbed a bank in Sylvester. He hires a little person named Shorty, an African-American sharecropper named Ernest, along with their wild hog, Hog, to help him track down the bad guys and rescue Lula. Along the way into the Big Thicket, they pick up a whore with a heart of gold and a sheriff-turned-bounty hunter. What follows next is a tale of daring do and coming of age for Jack. The characters are well drawn and the setting is superb. Tom Sawyer meets East Texas Gothic.